and Spen. Now, there have been a lot of questions in recent months about what Labour stands for. And let's be clear, the fault is on us as a party. It's on our leader. It's on all of us. And that includes me, who've been part of the shadow cabinet. We all know we owe it to the country to do better. And what is most encouraging about Labour's victory in Batley and Spen is not the result. It is fantastic that we won against the odds. And it's so satisfying that we beat the hateful campaign run by George Galloway. But it was a narrow victory in a seat we've held since Tony Blair's landslide in 1997. But what really got me excited and hopeful is that the campaign in Batley and Spen gave the country a fresh glimpse of what we stand for. It showed that facing down the grim, regressive hate of George Galloway wins. And it showed we can pick off former Conservative voters by showing that we stand for a better future than the bumbling incompetence and the mean-spirited nationalism of Boris Johnson. Our candidate, frankly, will be a brilliant new MP, Kim Leadbeater. She embodies everything the Labour Party must stand for, a local woman from her community who's passionate about fixing it, a candidate angry and hurt more than we can ever imagine by division and who's determined to bring people together. Our campaign, which was about fixing a society broken by economic inequality and social injustice, shone through when I was down there. And if you ask me what Labour stands for, my answer is that it's rooted in our values, in British values: fairness, honesty, creativity, decency and respect. We are a party who brought the country the National Health Service, and we won't stop until everyone gets access to healthcare and our nurses are properly paid. We're a party of work. We won't stop until every person who wants a job can get one. Decent jobs, highly skilled jobs, the education and training to get them. And we're a party of fairness. We won't stop until crime and antisocial behaviour is kicked off our streets. We're a party of inclusion, and we will not stop until the kind of bigotry George Galloway tried to provoke is extinguished. We have so much work left to do in this country until the country trusts us enough to form a government again, until people across the country trust us to lead them to a better future and obviously a fairer future. Now, for that, we have to be bold. Be proud of the values we stand for and put forward the policies that reflect them in a modern world of technological upheaval. But we know what we stand for, and Kim Leadbeater's sister, Jo Cox, who was murdered by a far-right terrorist in Batley and Spen just 5 years ago, expressed them most clearly. She said, "We are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us." Let us move forward together in that spirit until every part of British society reflects those words. So I want to hear from you. And the question is very straightforward. Is Labour on the up? Please call me if you think Labour is or is not on the up. And is Boris Johnson and his party's shine wearing off? Because this is Boris Johnson's second election defeat. You know, he lost in Amersham and Chesham, of course, a few weeks ago, and he lost again when many were predicting that the Conservatives would take this seat. So what's your view? What does Batley and Spen tell us? I want to hear from you on 0345 6060 973. But I'm joined by Joe Twyman, who's been a pollster for many years, co-founder of Delta Poll, on the line, just to give us his reflections as a pollster on what's going on at the moment, what we learn from Batley and Spen, and what we can expect, what we're seeing really from the political parties. Joe, are you with us?
I am. Good afternoon, David.
Hi, how are you?
I am very good, and it's thank you for having me on.
Not at all. So tell us what you think we should be reading from the Batley and Spen results and what the polling figures are telling us at the moment.
Well, it's very easy to get overexcited about an individual by-election at a very specific moment in time. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn anything from the results, because there are clear lessons that can be learned. What I would say is that if Labour had lost, it really would have been an extremely bad news story for them, and to deal with the aftermath of that would have created a lot of difficulty, and perhaps even a leadership election over the summer. Even though I think that from a strategic and polling point of view, that would not have been a good idea. But what we saw instead was a Labour victory. And people will say, oh, but it was only by 300 odd votes. Doesn't matter. Completely irrelevant. The fact is that Labour won, and that is, moving forward over the next few days and weeks, that is what people will remember. George Galloway's attempt to hold the balance of power and to let the Conservatives in was prevented, although he has claims that he will now take this to the courts. I think that's probably unlikely, having previously said that Labour would come third, and if they didn't, he would eat his hat. So two things there that I don't think will be happening. But anyway, Labour now have the momentum in as a result of this result. And over the next few days, the discussion will be about them and particularly about Kier Starmer. But having said that, the Labour Party still finds itself in a difficult position because of the unique situation that we remain in with the pandemic. When you look at the polling, you see that time and again, in poll after poll, people say that the most important issue facing the country is the coronavirus, and that is true by some distance. And for some people, it remains the only game in town. Those short-term health implications of COVID-19 are still playing on the minds of many people up and down the country. And now, with the vaccine programme being perceived to be a success, the Conservatives remain buoyant as a result of that. And since the start of the pandemic, the perceived success of the government's campaign in dealing with the coronavirus has correlated very closely with support for the Conservatives. And so as that remains the situation, there's little, as I see it, that Labour can really do. It's not as if it would be the right thing to do. It wouldn't be good politics, or particularly it wouldn't be good for the country for Labour to turn around and say, as the opposition, we oppose the vaccine programme, we oppose furlough payments. That wouldn't be good politics. And so instead, it's about reacting and preparing for when politics returns to something resembling normal in the next few months and years. When do you perceive
that to be, Joe?
I think a lot depends on the virus itself. If we have a quiet summer, then that's something. But if we have a third wave, the beginnings of a third wave in terms of infections, at least over the summer, and then if we have an uptick in hospital admissions, if not necessarily deaths, moving into the autumn and next year, then that could delay things. So we could see a return to normal essentially by the party conference season in September. But it could be the case that by January of next year, we still haven't seen that. A lot of this depends with the situation on the ground. But whenever it happens, Labour and the other parties need to be in a position to then respond to politics as normal, to ask the kind of questions about the economy, health, education, taxation that come up normally.
Two quick answers. One, there's a lot said about Kier Starmer. I personally think it's completely unfair. I mean, he's been in the job, just over a year, really, frankly, during a pandemic. But what do you think he's got to do? And two, has the shine come off Boris Johnson? He's lost in Amersham and Chesham, and he's lost in Batley and Spen.
No, to answer your second question first, no, I don't think the shine has come off Boris Johnson. He remains an unusually popular figure, and I think the only thing that would dent his popularity, and indeed has dented it over the last 12 months, is if the coronavirus programme is perceived to be failing, and that doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. In terms of what Kier Starmer can do, well, for a start, not listen to the accusations that he is massively unpopular. He is not massively unpopular, and though he is not hugely popular, by historical standards, he does very well. I would also ask people to examine the counterfactual. If not Kier Starmer, then who? And in terms of what he can do, I think it's all about laying the groundwork, setting the foundations, planting the seeds, to use many different metaphors, so that when politics returns to normal, when people start thinking about things beyond simply the short-term health implications, he and the Labour Party are in a position to say, but look at the mistake that you made, but look at the way that you dealt with this. Because individual things, like be it Matt Hancock or Dominic Cummings, they're not going to have an impact. People won't turn up at the ballot box and say, I'm not going to vote Conservative because Matt Hancock behaved badly with a member of his staff. But they may turn up at the ballot box and say, I'm not going to vote Conservative because they don't act in a fair way, because they did not build back equally, because they do not care about people like me in society. Those are the kind of broad narratives that will be important, and it's there that the Labour Party should be concentrating its efforts.
Joe Twyman, co-founder of Delta Poll, thank you so much for kicking off our discussion this afternoon. And what we're talking about Labour's victory in Batley and Spen this week. Is Labour coming home, as Kier Starmer suggests? Is Boris's shine wearing off? And I'm talking about what we can learn from that by-election result in Batley and Spen. Is Labour coming home? Or is the shine off Boris Johnson? He's now lost in 2 by-elections in a matter of weeks. Thank you for texting and tweeting. Let me just read some of these tweets here. I've got tweets here, less faceless in the UK. You can't paint it any other way, Mr. Lammy. The majority Labour had was reduced by 90%, and only 300 votes would have changed the result. This is in spite of Hancock. Labour held on by the skin of their teeth. I've got to say I disagree with that. I remember my by-election in Tottenham back in 2000. By-election always get a reduced turnout. My majority today is nothing like the first election that I had, so majorities do get reduced. You shouldn't pay too much mind to that. The key is here, it seems to me, that there was a significant community, clearly those from a Muslim background, some of whom were seduced to peel off with the nonsense that Galloway was going on with. And despite that, we still won. We still won, and we held on to the seat. That seems to me, despite that everyone was saying we're going to lose, is the key thing. Another one thing here, Keith in Exeter says, I trust Labour enough to make a government, but I'm not stupid enough to believe the Tory lies, and I can't believe the public are still failing for it. It's Keith in Exeter. Keith, I've got to say, there's much there that I agree with. Ben in Haringey. Ben, thank you for calling in.
Yes, David. I've always voted for you in the election, so for years, many years. But anyway, no, we can't tell what happened in Batley and Spen because of the George Galloway influence on it. Because a lot of these Muslim people that voted for George may also vote for the Conservatives. So we don't know. And the Liberal election they won was mainly on local issues, HS2, etc. So we can't really tell either from either of them.
Ben, I just want to challenge you a bit.
Yes.
Just challenge you a little bit. We know, generally speaking from the data, that 70% of those from a Muslim background are voting Labour. We know that. And we know that 20% of Batley and Spen are people from a Muslim background, and that clearly 8,000 of them chose to vote for George Galloway. So I think it's unlikely, given the first figure I told you, the 70% that are voting Labour, that there's a significant amount of those 8,000 who would have voted Conservative. I think that's unlikely. I think the vast majority of that were Labour votes. And we still won, is my point.
Well, I'm very pleased that we won. But the thing is, I think the left, including Labour and the Liberals and the Greens or whatever, every left-leaning party should form some sort of agreement for the next election. If they don't, then they will lose. Because the Conservatives are gerrymandering at the moment. Lots of things. They're silencing the 2.5 million people who they asked will be failed by the system because they don't have photo ID. All the different people that are affected by that usually would vote Labour. They will disappear. So therefore, you've got a situation where they're silencing the Electoral Commission that usually criticise what they're doing. and they're silencing the judges. I've never heard of a government except South America and Russia that actually silenced the judges, because that's what they tend to do in the judicial reviews that would bring out the Good Law Project.
Well, Ben, I totally agree that we should be very worried at some of the authoritarian stuff that's coming out of this government. They're challenging the judges with trying to curtail judicial review, which ordinary people use every day of the week when they've got a problem with the state. They're going after human rights. But your conclusion from that there should be a coalition, that the parties should get together, I just want to interrogate that a bit, because some people will rightly say, look, we saw this in Amersham and Chesham. People are able to know in the end, which of the two parties stand any prospect in their seat, and they're able to make their own decision to vote. For example, as I think we saw in Amersham and Chesham, there were a lot of Labour votes where people voted Lib Dem. And in fact, I've got very good friends in Amersham and Chesham who I know are Labour voters. They voted Liberal Democrat. What they don't
what should happen.
What they're less pleased about, though, Ben, is when the parties stitch it up themselves. They're less happy when if they wanted to vote Labour comes off the ballot and says we're going to leave it to our friends the Liberal Democrats. That makes them, because the choice that they could have isn't there anymore. And people don't quite like parties stitching it up amongst themselves in the corridors of power. That's the danger of the coalition that you indicate. And, if we look over recent years, look at the coalition the Lib Dem struck with the Conservatives. In some senses, Kier Starmer and the Labour Party, because we've been in a pandemic, have been more cooperative with the government than we otherwise might have been. On the whole, the British electorate punishes you when you get into a bed with another party. You don't get rewarded, Ben.
Well, perhaps not of a coalition, but only stand where if Labour has no chance of winning, according to history, then you don't stand a seat, and you have an agreement with the parties that are going to win on the left. And therefore, you end up with a decent government, and you may decide after that to have a coalition. But the Liberals they were second in I think it was over 100 seats. They were actually second to the last election. So therefore, if Labour votes had been out of the picture, they may have won. And the Labour may have won where Liberals didn't stand. So it's worth, we haven't been in power for 20 years. We must look at something else in order to get power. Power is the important thing at the end of the day. You can stand up for your principles, but you can stand up for your principles on the street whilst the government are doing exactly what they like. And that's what we're doing at the moment. And all they have to do is change the Prime Minister, because people are fed up with the lies, all the lies. But all they have to do is you vote in somebody like Richie Sunak, who's reasonably squeaky clean, and then you've got a problem on your hands again. You can't keep attacking Johnson because he lies.
Well, you've got a point.
That's the problem.
You've got a point there, Ben. Thanks so much for calling in. I want to get Dinesh in Oxford in quickly. Dinesh, what's your view?
Good afternoon, Mr. Abbey. So congratulations, first of all. I just want to pick a point about the religion-based politics. It wasn't just George Galloway. Labour Party was also involved in distributing posters showing Boris Johnson and the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, to the Muslim side, the Muslim community. How do you justify that? Because it doesn't sound like fairness, and it sort of feels like you're bringing religion, as in the politics, are bringing religion into the country. And I've seen enough of that in the Indian subcontinent that that's never a good idea. Even in the US, people are sort of taking the platform of Christianity and demonstrating their credentials before they vote. It's a dangerous direction, Mr. Lammy. What do you say about that?
Dinesh, look, your point is well made. I abhor this culture war that's coming into politics. And I did see a leaflet that was put out, and I didn't like the leaflet. And I think there was some apology and withdrawing of the leaflet. But I've got to tell you, nothing the Labour Party has done is comparable with the politics of Galloway and what we saw. I was in the seat. It was horrendous. There was horrendous attacks on our candidate, Kim Ledbetter. There were horrendous references to people's sexuality. There was horrendous propaganda in relation to different positions that the party's never taken on issues in the Middle East. It was absolutely horrendous. And by the way, from our Conservative colleagues, some of the dog whistle politics, the culture war stuff, I think is horrific. So there may have been an error with that leaflet. I didn't see it personally, but I did hear it. But I don't think it's comparable. But your general point that we should really push back at the way in which religion is being used to stoke division in elections all over the world, I think is a broad point that I would certainly accept. Thank you so much for calling in. You're listening to David Lammy here. We're talking about Labour's victory in Batley and Spen. Is Labour coming home? And is Boris Johnson's shine wearing off? Or is this his second don't forget, it's his second by-election defeat in a row. Pollster Joe Twyman, I spoke to earlier, said, no, it's not coming off. What do you think? Call me on 0345 6060973. Text me on 84850. Or, of course, you can tweet. You're listening to David Lammy on LBC, talking about the situation following Batley and Spen and whether Labour is, in fact, coming home and has the shine come off Boris Johnson. Thanks for your texts and tweets. I'm just going to read one of your texts here from Rob. David, do you want the answer to improve the continued decline of Labour? Starmer and the rest need to stop lambasting everything the Tories do and come up with their own ideas and proposals. People are sick of hearing the same old message from Labour and fed up hearing nothing about how they would deal with the same. We need an effective opposition, not a constant, loud hailer of anti-Touring nothingness. And that's from Rob in Raleigh in Exeter. I just got to tell you, Rob, I disagree with that. Yes, we've got to do more. Of course, we've got to do more. We've been in the middle of a pandemic. We just said that we'd spend money on getting state school kids equipped for the new world after the pandemic. Money the Tories are not spending. It's 15 quid a child by the Tories at the moment that they're spending on top-up for classes and top-up education. We would actually spend on education and training. In my area of policy, I proposed that we deal with the backlog that we have in our courts. I've come forward with legislation to deal with women who are still being raped. I want a minimum, by the way, for rape of 7 years. The Tories don't agree with me on that. Of course we've got policy. But the truth is, with a pandemic, people don't hear you as loudly as they would if you didn't have it. But if you disagree with me, call me and let me know on 0345 6060 973. Zahir in Spen. Zahir, hi.
Hi, good afternoon, David. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for calling in, because you're on the ground. You're on the front line.
Yeah, I was there that Friday when that quite horrific verbal attack was made on Kim.
Well, it was horrendous, because I just think it's horrendous for any man, particularly, to abuse a woman like that in public, to harangue her, to follow her to a car. I thought Absolutely. It was just unacceptable and grim. And by the way, as always with these rabble-rousers, he didn't even come from Batley and Spen. Turns out the guy came from Birmingham.
That's right. He came from Birmingham, and he approached George initially as if it was his long-lost uncle. Gave him a hug, even with the pandemic, and then it was pointed out that Kim turned up. We were there, unfortunately. I didn't feel Kim had enough people around her, which was perhaps a mistake by the Labour Party because of what's happened previously to her sister. But I guess they didn't know what was about to come. He marched up to her, and then obviously you must have seen the video clips of hurling abuse at her. And then when he walked away, rubbed his hands and said, "Job done." And I think Kim handled it really well, but at one moment, me and my brother were there as well. We had to walk in front of her to stop this verbal attack. And what George has introduced to Batley and Spen was quite horrific over the last 2-3 weeks. I've experienced it firsthand.
And just give listeners a sense of how horrific it was and why, frankly, it's so extraordinary that Kim won in the end.
It was extraordinary that she won with all the abuse. And for example, for putting simple plaques up, vote for Kim Leadbeater has became an issue. I was actually followed in a car by a bloke in a BMW, and general harassment. When I stopped him, he said he's got the right to follow me.
Sort of aggressive gangsterism.
Yeah, gangster, absolutely. And it was just bad that people, like for example Tracy Brabin, when campaigning and she's had eggs thrown at her, that kind of situation.
I heard about an 8-year-old boy having eggs thrown at him who was campaigning for Labour. Sickening. That's
right. But we won by 300 votes, which is quite amazing. But Labour by no means is out of the woods.
So what do you think we've got to do now?
We've got to work on, for example, I think the Muslim community, I think here the amount of attention is given. Anybody mentioning anything Jewish becomes anti-Semitic, and it's hammered. I feel almost sorry for the way Jeremy's been treated, Jeremy Corbyn. I feel there isn't, David, we've got budding doctors in my family, my niece. I've got dentists. All the youngsters in our family are coming through. There isn't a week that doesn't go by that one of them hasn't had some sort of Islamophobic remark made, and it's a real concern that Labour aren't grasping this issue.
Why do we have to? I mean, I think I see the Islamophobia. I see it happening. I think there's a sort of almost everyday Islamophobia. I don't think there are enough people speaking up against it, calling it out. Of course, you know, of the racism that still exists in society. But there's also anti-Semitism. And what worries me is losing the ability to recognise that all of this is happening. Just because one raises a voice about one, it doesn't mean you've forgotten about the other. That's the challenge. And also in the end, recognising, and I really say this squarely, the bottom line is the Labour Party is there to improve the lot of working people, historically working class people. It's there for everyone in the country to bring us forward together, to set a future tone for the country, to invest in public services and things. This is the mainstream stuff. We've got to be careful if we think that the politics is solely about the politics of identity. As much as I care passionately about anti-racism, I don't want voters left thinking the only issue for the Labour Party to address are issues of equality.
You have to understand that vast amounts of people voted for George Galloway or didn't vote Labour this time. It was almost a protest versus a call-out, in particular in the last 12 months, about the lack of passion shown by Kier. In particular, the passion he has when there's an issue made regarding an anti-Semitic remark. You have to understand those people, those 8,500 people, mostly would have voted for Labour. The reason why they didn't vote, they feel neglected.
Yeah, but isn't that because Galloway's exploiting their
absolutely.
neglect?
Galloway ran a horrific campaign. Full of nastiness. I accept that.
I mean, protest for a day, and they almost got a Tory for 3 years.
Absolutely, and that's what we said outside the mosque when he was standing there. A little bit of a chuckle, and that's what disgusted me in his whole approach. When Kim was abused verbally, his chuckle, because my brother went up to him and said, "Look, voting for you, George, means you get Boris. It's very, very simple."
And the other thing is,
he didn't like that.
Why? I mean, I saw this poster that Galloway had Starmer out.
Fist.
Why are we running against Starmer when Starmer isn't leading the country? Why don't we hear sufficient noise about the Conservatives who are actually running the country?
Well,
does anyone think that the Conservatives are all down with the Muslim community? Because that's not my recollection.
In particular, well, it's the way press cover things. What about this week, for example, the Hancock affair? That's absolutely outrageous that Hancock can get away, or the Conservative Party doesn't get a mark against them. It's outrageous how Boris is able to decorate his apartment or flat or house or whatever in the way he does. And it's like, it seems to be not mentioned in the press. However, one anti-Semitic remark or something that they grasp onto from the Labour Party is magnified tenfold. It's amazing what the Conservative Party is getting away with.
So here,
under the cloud of the pandemic. What you say,
but I've got to tell you, I think that's because the Labour Party and some members of the Labour Party have been guilty of horrendous anti-Semitism, and Kier Starmer's been absolutely right to make it absolutely
100%.
clear that we will not be moving forward. We cannot move forward with that as an issue. Thank you so much to hear for calling in. Please call in again. I want to get Christopher in King's Clear in very quickly. Christopher.
Oh, hi, David. How you doing?
Very well. Christopher, what's your view?
It's an absolute honour to speak to you. Thank you. I've been a long time supporter of the Labour Party, even right back to the 80s. I think you and I are a similar age. To answer a couple of your questions directly, you asked about, is this going to take the shine off Boris Johnson? Let me just stay right up front. I'm not a fan of Bojo in any shape or form. The guy, he couldn't lie straight in bed. But the problem, I think, is that there's a wave of
We've lost you, Christopher, very sadly, so I'm going to go to the break. But if you could get back in, do call in again. We're talking about Labour's Batley and Spen victory. Is Labour bouncing back? You're listening to David Lammy here at RBC. I tell you what, I wouldn't mind a female caller to call in. I've noticed I've got some calls on the board. They're all men. So if you're a woman who's got a view on whether the shine's come off Boris Johnson or Kier Starmer, please call in because you'll get put straight through. Talking about Batley and Spen, and I did a call out previously to get a woman to call in because there were no women calling in. I was talking only to men about politics and the election. I thought this is a bit weird for my show, and Sally called in. Sally in Stourbridge in the West Midlands. Sally, thank you so much for calling in.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I heard the call out for women and I thought, this is me.
We've got to balance it out.
So many points. I was listening to what people have been saying. Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, I agree with that. But the main point I wanted to make was about perception. It's all about how the Labour Party is perceived. I'm a lifelong Labour supporter and I am a Labour member, and I did vote for Sir Kier Starmer.
Thank you, Sally.
Because I thought he would appeal, apart from him not being Jeremy Corbyn. And in the past I've supported Jeremy Corbyn, but not recently. I thought he would appeal to other people, but something is not coming across, and I don't know why. And I keep hearing the same things being said. He's a nice guy, he's a decent guy, he's obviously got integrity, and then you hear people say, you don't know what the Labour Party stands for. And I think, what? Excuse me? You don't know what the Labour Party stands for? But you hear almost the same words over and over again. So basically, we are not getting the message through. And I know it's because we've got to battle the mainstream media and we haven't got the money to do that. But we should be out there pounding the streets and leafleting. Not me, because I'm disabled, so I'm not pounding anyone's stick. But we need to get out there. We need to appeal to young people. We need to say what's on offer. And we also need to remember that there are a lot of people in need of our help, but there are people who think, don't really need their help. Perhaps I'm more of a Tory than I thought I was. No, you're not. Boris Johnson does not represent you.
Yeah, and Sally,
remember that.
I mean, the great thing about Batley and Spen is it was one of those by-elections that did bring the party together. Loads of people went up to campaign from all sections of the party, and that is obviously a great thing, because the point you make about, look, we haven't got all the money in the world in the Labour Party. We, on the whole, are outspent by the Conservatives. So for us, it's really about people knocking on doors and that personal contact, but they do need to have an offer that they're presenting to people. And by the way, that offer has to be not just for folk who need a Labour government because they rely on public services in a particular way, but actually it has to be an offer, it seems to me, that is for everybody. I
agree.
I remember that pledge card when Tony Blair came into office. It was, the pledge on schools, the pledge on childcare. These were mainstream things. Putting the police back where they needed to be in an era where there was a lot of concern about crime, particularly following the murder of Jamie Bolger. I remember it well. Mainstream stuff that can appeal to the entire country. And in this country, you do need Conservatives voters to lend Labour their vote or to trust Labour with their vote. And I think the point you make there is very, very true. Perception, Sally? I mean, look, I do think we've had this peculiar time where for years and years and years, the only thing that could get a look in was Brexit, and you didn't hear about anything else. And then we've had for the last 18 months, the only thing that can get a look in is Batley and Spen. And other than, sorry, not Batley and Spen, the only thing that could get a look in the last 2 weeks, Batley and Spen, the only thing that could get a look in generally was the pandemic. And that does,
task,
really,
it does
make it tough. It does make it tough. I want to get back. Joe Twyman at the beginning was suggesting that we really, for Labour, until we get back to politics as normal, i.e. we're out of this pandemic period and people are worrying about the economy or they're worrying about crime and they're voting on that basis, it is going to be tough for the leader of the party, was his view.
I agree, but I think he does need to take the gloves off a bit. I know it goes against the grain for his personality and character, but the last week's Prime Minister's Question Time, we saw Johnson squirming, and it's about time. No, not many people watch PMQ, so it got out, though, that he did manage to make a few blows. I'm afraid he's going to have to be a bit more like them. I'm sorry, but...
Don't apologise. I'm a great believer in taking the gloves off, as you probably know, Sally. I'm not afraid to take the gloves off, so make no apologies for that. Sally, thank you for calling in. Really appreciate it. Please call in again. I want to get Chris in from Richmond upon Thames. Chris.
David, great to talk to you. So I'm a Liberal Democrat voter and supporter, but I am desperate, like you, to get rid of this government. 3 suggestions for you. Number 1, please back proportional representation at the next general election. It's a no-brainer. Look at the maths, number 1. Number 2, you've got some brilliant people in your backbenches. But you've got people like Yvette Cooper, Wes Streeting. Why on earth are they not in the shadow cabinet? Why is Peter Kyle not your education spokesman? You've got some brilliant people who are not at the front row. And I think at the moment, you sadly don't look like a government waiting for a lot of people. And I think that's a point that Kier needs to wake up to.
You said 3 things, Chris. What was the third?
Well, the third thing I was going to say is parties need to work together. The Lib Dems and Labour, I think, they haven't obviously covertly colluded to determine the results in the last 2 weeks. But clearly, if the Lib Dems don't make much effort in a seat like Batley, you have a better chance. 2 years ago, Zach Goldsmith stood for re-election when the snap election was called. And Sarah only lost her seat because the Labour Party in Richmond put out a polling day operation, David. They got 6,000 votes. And Zach sneaked back by 45 votes. And he was an MP that was reviled by most people. And your Labour Party facilitated that. And people here just could not believe it, including Labour members. They were just in disbelief, David. It was ridiculous.
I think the first point you make about proportional representation, that is a legitimate point. It's a point well made. It's a point of discussion. There's a debate in the party about proportional representation. Some people really believe in it. Others like first past the post. I certainly historically have been someone who supported first past the post because I quite like strong governments. I think people get strong governments. But I do think that we're in an era where politics is found in lots of different places. There's a splintering going on, a fracturing going on, and forcing people to work together, moving away from the binary left-right thing isn't a bad thing. So more recently, I've come round to PR, but of course that is not the position of the Labour Party. You mentioned people like Wes Streeting. Wes Streeting is now in the shadow cabinet. Peter Kyle is really doing well. He was in my team. He effectively got promotion into the education team as their education space, working very well with Kate. He's on his uppers. I wouldn't worry about that. And my colleague Yvette Cooper's doing a fantastic job where she is leading the select committee. I've got no doubt if Labour were to form a government that Yvette Cooper would be playing a very big part of that government going forward. Some of this is always about, look, in the end, colleagues do need some time. New colleagues who are emerging to get known in the public. I've had 21 years in public life. I certainly haven't been on the front bench for all of that time. You have to know also how to make noise from the backbenches. And I do think sometimes people are a little bit timid to stand up and speak aggressively. On the point you make about a coalition and we've got to work together, I just come back to the point I made previously. We've got to be careful. The electorate don't like stitch-ups. They like having the choice. And I'm quite sure that there were people in Richmond-upon-Thames, as much as they may have had strong views about Zach Goldsmith, there were people who wanted to vote Labour. But Chris, thank you for putting your point so robustly and calling in. Please call again.